When did you know that you were an actor?
Oh my goodness. Which time
The
is
first
is
time.
really the question. Oh, the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Okay, I knew that I was an actor. Um, I was in 8th grade. I had just changed schools. And I was coming from a pretty painful social dynamic at the school that I had been at previously. And I went to a new school. Nobody knew me as the weird kid on the playground. So I got to start over. And I tried to integrate with social circles that I had previously tried to integrate with. And I was running into the same results. I was having the same thing happening. And there was a moment that switched for me where I was like, "Oh, I don't have to do this. Like I don't have to be a cool kid sidekick. I can go off and do something else." So I switched out of volleyball
Mm-hmm.
and into acting as an elective. And something changed in me when I started talking with my teacher, when I started like implementing the things that she suggested for how to like do acting as a thing. And I was like, oh, I actually like this. Like it was a new experience for me to like doing something. Like previous extracurricular activities had always been sort of like onerous for me, or at least extracurricular within the school context.
Mm-hmm.
I had been an avid reader for basically since I learned how to recognize letters. Um, but being able to like have a sanctioned space where I could not just consume stories but embody them
Ooh.
made a huge difference for me.
So what kinds of stuff were you doing in school in your first sort of acting program?
There weren't a whole lot of options in 8th grade, but in 9th grade, we switched into high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's not the case for all schools, but it was for mine. And I got to do the class as an entire year program instead of as like a quarterly program. And I went basically whole hog into that. So I did school plays. We did a little bit of film work. There was like a radio portion at the school, and we also did competitive speech and drama, which is where you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday and go and get on the school bus and drive somewhere across the state and do your little piece that you have performed, and people like make judgments, and there are rankings. And
Whoa.
you get to go to regionals if you place highly enough, and if you place highly enough at regionals you get to go to state.
Uh-huh.
So I did all of that.
How did you do in those competitions?
I did okay. I think I would have done better if I had spent a little bit more time preparing my pieces instead of just enjoying goofing off with my friends in the practice rooms.
I'm picking up on some kind of underlying tension here where like the motivation to get into this seemed to be about sort of like liberating yourself socially. And then there's also this like this the idea of being like judged for your performance on purpose feels sort of at odds with that. Was it sort of like an exposure therapy kind of thing?
um, I mean, I think what was going on there was that I loved the thing. I wanted to do the thing as much as possible. The context that I was able to do the thing in was one that was highly structured.
Mm-hmm.
Like my drama teacher had specifications for like what we were allowed to eat on a daily basis,
Whoa.
the ways that we needed to dress when we came to those competitions. And I was like, well, I just want to do the thing. So I will figure out a way to like follow these rules that is acceptable. And because we are teens and there's like a natural human impulse toward agency, we will just off gas that by fucking off and making the most ridiculous film project that we can.
So film. Okay. So that was a side thing, a thing that you were doing with your friends in the game.
Because our film projects were self-directed and not under the ever watchful eye
right.
of our teacher who had certain types of rigidity in the way that she thought that things ought to be. We had more room for exploration in that. And because we were real goofballs, and this was in the early aughts in Oklahoma. The one particular film project that I remember working on was so this is wild, but cockfighting had very recently been banned in the state. And so my buddies and I had this idea for a little project which we called CFI, Cockfighting Investigation, which is CFI, basically, like there are going to be underground rings now that it is illegal, and we need to take these criminal. I mean, it was off the wall. I believe Colonel Sanders was involved at some point.
Sure. Wow. Okay. So that makes total sense as like the time that you got to sort of define the stage and like no one was watching until it was already done. And yeah, that makes total sense. So you said that there were multiple times that you figured out that you were an actor. Does that mean that at some point after this, what sounds like a very wide ranging exploration of like all of the things that an actor might do, was there then a point where you weren't an actor anymore or forgot or decided that you weren't an actor anymore?
Okay. So this is sort of a through line throughout my life so far is that when I was like a little kid, nobody knew what I wanted to be when I grew up because what I wanted to be when I grew up changed every time I watched a movie. I saw something well embodied in film and I was like, I want to do that. And, if I hadn't been in rural Oklahoma, if there had been like a stronger arts community inside of my context, somebody might have seen a child pointing to a movie every time they saw a movie and saying, I want to do that, and thought to say, oh, maybe I should get my kid in an acting class to see how they like it. But it just like never came to mind for any of the adults in my life. So like my early programming was like, this is not a thing that a person can do. Like it was a class that I took in I went all in on it in school when I had the chances. And then the time came to go to college. I was like, oh, I'm gonna be a science major. And then it was sort of like years later that I recognized like there was a drama program. I was in college when I was like, whoa, I could conceivably like change my major. And then a lot of difficult life circumstances happened. And that didn't end up happening. And then the pattern for me has been just sort of like periodically I get to a place where my life slows down enough and I remember like, oh yeah, this is a thing that I like to do. And I go back to it and I go all in on it. And then the chaos returns. The Lord of my ascendant is conjoined to Uranus very tightly. So I get a lot of surprises and changes in my life. But acting is not the only thing that I come back to over and over, but it is definitely something that I come back to over and over.
So I know that it's not like your main form of work, but has it ever been sort of like a professional pursuit for you, like but beyond like a project level? Like, have you ever had periods of time where you were like a working actor and that was your thing?
I have, yeah, yeah. I during one such, I'm tossing myself back into this. I was doing the working actor thing in a small, sort of a smaller market,
Mm-hmm.
but I was doing commercial work. I was in the touring company with the local improv group. I was teaching improv classes. We were doing some pretty fun stuff. I was working with the local medical school in an acting context. Yeah, that during that period of time, I had something like 5 jobs,
Mm-hmm.
most of them to do with performing
Mm-hmm.
or some kind of character work.
Did you feel like you were fulfilling some that this thing that's been a through line your whole life at that time, or was it so many different things that it was hard to sort of unify?
That period of time in my life was delightful in a lot of ways and hard in a lot of other ways.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I had those 5 jobs, and I also had like 9 partners. So I feel like and some of them higher stress than others.
Mm.
So that was maybe a little much for me at that period of time. As I've gotten older, I've recognized that there I need to have adequate like solitude, like
Mm.
self connection,
Mm.
to be able to resource the kinds of showing up out in the world that I like to do.
Mm-hmm. So how does acting fit into your life now? And is it something that you go out and do in that way sometimes?
It is sometimes. It
Uh-huh.
is. I have been in a little bit more of. Well, I mean, I say that. I will find a way to do a performance.
Uh-huh.
There was a, even if it's just like uh, reading young adult series
Mm.
books aloud
Mm-hmm.
to a partner or a friend. There is something fundamental to me about embodying story, and if I don't find ways to do that intentionally, it can come out in other less helpful ways.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Acting out, as they like to say.
um, well, hmm.
I'm mostly just saying that because the word acting is in it.
Right, right. I will be playing a character
Mm-hmm.
in somebody's story,
Uh-huh.
whether I choose to or not.
Uh-huh.
So I might as well pick when I can.
Uh-huh. I see. So okay, so you said you brought the word story back and reminded me from back at the beginning that was sort of the magical thing for you, that you were talking about reading and writing and that being a very early like sort of advanced practice of yours, and then acting then sort of showed you how you can like enter into and participate in stories. And
Hmm.
so the example you just gave of something that you would do now, of like dramatic reading of a story, like that's a way of tapping into this that you sort of suffuse into your everyday life. Can you tell me more about the role of story in your life?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I'm of the opinion that we as humans make sense of all of the various things in our life that happen, that we have influence over, that we don't have influence over. The way that a person gets through that without losing their shit is creating story
Mm-hmm.
around this whole messy amalgam of experiences, both internal and external. And like a big part of my life has been learning to recognize that the stories that I create are not the same stories as another person may be creating about the same situation.
Mm-hmm.
And also that maybe the first story that I create to make sense of my life is not the one that I want to agree with.
Mm.
Like, I've had a very difficult time understanding things since I was a kid. I didn't come into life understanding like social interactions or like what other people were thinking very well.
Mm-hmm.
So diving into story was almost a sort of exposure therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if a book can tell me like
Mm-hmm.
what a character is experiencing, then that helps me build out my theory of mind for other people, to be able to understand them, to be able to not just snap judgment like that person did that thing because they're the worst.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that person did that thing because they have an entire lifetime of context, of experience, of internal reactions, and like formative whatever the hells, that them taking that action in that particular moment is the only thing that makes sense for them right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and if I can remember that, it's much easier for me to be in relationship with other people.
Mm-hmm. So you described story as sort of this like primordial human capacity for making sense
Mm-hmm.
of life.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that acting has served for you the purpose of like giving you like superhero skills in story, like the ability to sort of try on different stories and do it with your whole body and like mind at the same time, like gives you the ability to sort of navigate between stories to help you with that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Not the only tool
Uh-huh.
that helps me do that. But a very important one, especially when it comes to the embodiment. A big part of acting, like for many actors, is like creating a history
Hmm.
that makes this motivation and this action and this moment make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because a person, at least my perspective, is that a person can't be an effective actor if they think that the character that they're playing is kind of full of shit or like an asshole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, I have to be able to find a way to humanize this character if I'm going to like inhabit the space of that character.
It seems like a sort of like an act of compassion for someone, that like it's like becoming them. Well, maybe that's not even a fair way of putting it. Like, would you say that to play a difficult character like that, you have to become that person, or is this just like a way of understanding them well enough to figure out what they would do?
There are different schools of thought about this. There are people who treat acting and character work as almost sort of like a possession and trance state, and they do completely become that person. And then there are people who can treat it as a much more detached thing, where like I'm doing this because that is what is, you know, laid out to do. And there can be very, very effective people working in both of those. You hear a little bit more about the method, like,
Right.
like he's playing an asshole character, so he's fucking, cutting
Being
the heads
mean to
off of
everyone.
rats
Yeah.
and leaving it in somebody's trailer or whatever. For me, I need a little bit of both. Like, I do the more sort of like cognitive work beforehand, just sort of like preparing, like thinking through what experiences could have led to that. And once I like build that foundation here, it makes it possible for me to like enter the trance state, the possession state, just for the performance, so that I don't have to walk around like being any more of a weirdo than I already am. Like when it's time to go home and eat dinner.